I recently finished the autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr., and gotta say, I'm pretty embarrassed by how little I knew about the civil rights movement. This is probably a testament to the revisionist history that we're taught in the South, where I grew up at least. If you haven't read this book, definitely recommend it, put it on your list. It was very engaging. It actually held my attention the entire time, which is rare for books, for me at least. And I was moved to tears multiple times throughout. Not only by the eloquence in which MLK spoke, but also by the strength of people power. Like, I was tearing up, y'all. So what can vegans learn from Martin Luther King? So much, and that is the purpose of this video. I wanted to start out with a few quotes by MLK in regard to animal rights. Never be afraid to do what's right, especially if the well-being of a person or animal is at stake. Society's punishments are small compared to the wounds we inflict on our soul when we look the other way. And my personal favorite, one day the absurdity of the almost universal human belief in the slavery of other animals will be palpable. We shall then have discovered our souls and become worthier of sharing this planet with them. So you might be asking yourself, how the heck was Martin Luther King not vegan? And you know, it's a good question, but I ask myself the same question about literally everyone. I mean, how did our founding fathers exclude women and people of color from liberty and justice for all? So while MLK himself was not vegan during his lifetime, his son, Dexter Scott King, has been an animal rights advocate since the 80s and even influenced Coretta to go vegan in 1995. And she was quoted in an interview saying that animal rights is the logical extension of my husband's philosophy of nonviolence. His political strategy of nonviolent direct action was inspired by Gandhi, who I'm sure you all know was a vegetarian and has a lot of great animal rights quotes, including the greatness of a nation and its moral progress can be judged by the way its animals are treated. Of course, MLK is adored today, but during his time, he was a very controversial figure, and I think a lot of people forget this. He got a lot of criticism for being a militant extremist in his push for legislation. Gee, I wonder what that sounds like. This is exactly how vegans are viewed by the mainstream. Even the most peaceful activists are accused of being pushy and militant and extreme. Unfortunately, a lot of vegans will bend to these social pressures because they don't want to be viewed this way. So they'll adopt a more moderate stance, advocating for meatless Mondays and higher welfare standards and reducitarianism. And then they criticize activists who take a hardline abolitionist stance for being unpalatable and kind of demand that they soften their approach. I think it's a fair debate to have about which forms of activism are effective and which forms are damaging, but it's pretty clear from history that Martin Luther King's approach was extremely effective. And he advocated for an end to segregation and for racial equality, nothing less. That's why I believe that it would be a disservice to the animals to advocate for anything short of complete abolition of animal exploitation. Now, I want to read a few passages from Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail to draw a parallel for you guys. To give some context, Martin Luther King had been arrested for holding demonstrations protesting racial injustices in Birmingham, Alabama. While he was in jail, he received a letter, like an open letter that was published in a newspaper, from various white church leaders criticizing him for his tactics and poor timing of the demonstrations. They claimed that in violating the law, he was acting un-Christ-like. He was compelled to respond. I mean, he was in jail, so what else are you gonna do, right? And his response was absolutely savage. If you don't have time to read his entire autobiography, I would at least recommend reading his letter, which I've linked in the description box because it's pretty freaking epic. He starts off the letter addressing their criticism that he was creating too much tension. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are quite right in calling for negotiation. Indeed, this is the very purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis and fosters such a tension that a community which has constantly refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue that it can no longer be ignored. My citing the creation of tension as part of the work of the nonviolent resistor may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly opposed violent tension, but there is a type of constructive, nonviolent tension which is necessary for growth. Then he puts things into perspective by listing various instances of racial injustice in gruesome detail. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. Perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait. But when you have seen the vicious mobs lynch your mothers and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim, when you have seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, and even kill your black brothers and sisters, when you have seen the vast majority of your 20 million Negro brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain to your 6-year-old daughter why she can't go to the public amusement park that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in her eyes when she is told that Funtown is closed for colored children, and see ominous clouds of inferiority beginning to form in her little mental sky, developing an unconscious bitterness towards white people. When you have to concoct an answer for a 5-year-old son who is asking, Daddy, why do white people treat colored people so mean? When you take a cross-country drive and find it necessary to sleep night after night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you. When you are humiliated day in and day out by nagging signs reading white and colored. When your first name becomes the N-word, your middle name becomes Boy, however old you are, and your last name becomes John, and your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs. When you are harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a Negro, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never quite knowing what to expect next, plagued with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degenerating sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when the cup of endurance runs over, and men are no longer willing to be plunged into the abyss of despair. I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. Then he addresses their criticism of disobeying the law. One may well ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are 2 types of laws, just and unjust. I would be the first to advocate obeying just laws. One has not only a legal but a moral responsibility to obey just laws. Conversely, one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws. He goes on to say, an unjust law is a code that a numerical or power majority group compels a minority group to obey, but does not make binding on itself. This is difference made legal. By the same token, a just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow, that it is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. The point is, legality does not equal morality. This is probably my favorite part of the letter, where he just completely roasts those who take a moderate position on the issue of civil rights. I must confess that over the past few years, I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his stride towards freedom is not the white citizens' counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action. This concept of negative peace really stood out to me because a lot of vegans are afraid to talk about veganism with their friends and family because of the tension that it creates. But avoiding the topic to maintain peace with the family is misguided because, like he said, there is no peace without justice. The tension is still there, it's just suppressed. Violence against animals is happening every second of every day. Lastly, MLK addresses the accusations of extremism. You speak of our activity in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my nonviolent efforts as those of an extremist. But though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. He then quotes a bunch of influential leaders who promoted positive change, but were labeled as extremists during their time. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or for the extension of justice? Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists. I share this all to say that it is impossible to stand up for the rights of the oppressed without facing massive resistance from the mainstream. It is so important to keep things in perspective. We breed billions of cows, pigs, and chickens into existence and confine them in filthy conditions. We separate newborn calves from their mothers. We throw male chicks into giant macerators. We mutilate, dehorn, debeak, and castrate them without anesthesia. We cram them into trucks and ship them off to slaughterhouses at a fraction of their natural lifespan. A bolt gun to the head and a gas chamber are deemed humane methods of slaughter for cows and pigs. We hang chickens upside down along an assembly line and hastily slit their throats and dismember them so we can fry up and eat their dead bodies. We drag fish from the oceans, letting them slowly suffocate to death. We perform insanely cruel experiments on rabbits, chimps, and mice in the name of advancement. We anally electrocute and skin foxes and mink for their fur. We keep wild animals in cages for our entertainment in the name of education. We are well beyond the point of needing meat, fur, leather, and wool for our survival. Animal experimentation is antiquated and completely barbaric. Yet we continue these practices because of our long history of doing so. This is the way we've always done it. It's tradition. There were so many setbacks during the civil rights movement, but activists persisted because they knew that they were right. And in the same vein, as vegans, we know that we're right. Just as racism and sexism are wrong, speciesism is wrong. These things are all interwoven as they of the status quo and the exploitation of one group for the benefit of another. We have logic and reason and science on our side. The vegan movement is not failing. We have to expect setbacks and not be discouraged by them. The zeitgeist is upon us, and we are on the right side of history. People are going to look back in 100 years and view what we're doing to animals as completely barbaric and insane, just as we view segregation today as completely barbaric. As MLK famously said, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice." As much as Martin Luther King talked about love and forgiveness, he spoke against the evils of ignorance and silence. I think that he was neither a pessimist nor an optimist, but a realist, in that he recognized the immense struggle that he was up against, but refused to believe that his efforts were futile. He railed against passivity, stating that human progress is neither automatic nor inevitable. Every step towards the goal of justice requires sacrifice, suffering, and struggle, the tireless exertions and passionate concern of dedicated individuals. In his last sermon before he was assassinated, he talked about this struggle. The struggle is always there. It gets discouraging sometimes. It gets very disenchanting sometimes. Some of us are trying to build a temple of peace. We speak out against war. We protest, but it seems that your head is going against a concrete wall. It seems to mean nothing. And so often you set out to build the temple of peace. You are left lonesome. You are left discouraged. You are left bewildered. Well, that is the story of life. And the thing that makes me happy to say is that I can hear a voice crying through the vista of time saying, "It may not come today, it may not come tomorrow, but it is well within thine heart. It is well that you are trying." An obvious takeaway from Martin Luther King's legacy is to love thy enemy, right? Like, try to see the good in everyone and be forgiving and understanding towards those that are not vegan. We can't just harbor hatred and bitterness towards everyone that participates in this evil system. We need to use our very justified anger in creative and productive ways. Because only light can drive out darkness, just as only love can drive out hate. I think my biggest takeaway from Martin Luther King is that you can be loving and kind without being passive or compromising in your promotion of animal rights. We need to be the strong allies that we would want fighting for us if roles were reversed. Thank you so much for watching. As always, subscribe to my channel, give it a like, give it a thumbs up, and comment down below.
Yo, how when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now. How when me eat them, I wonder when me yam. When me tell them say that I'm a vegan man. How when me eat them, I wonder when me eat. When me tell them say me no eat no fish, no meat now.